Welcome to Dead Headspace, now a part of the Silver Shamrock Horrorcast, a podcast network that includes Killing Time with Silver Shamrock and Unburying the Dead, where we exhume classic horror paperbacks for the new generation. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Ghana, and all other major platforms, which now includes YouTube. That's right, now you can watch your favorite episodes, including this one, by searching for Dead Headspace. I'm your host, Patrick R. McDonough, joined always by my co-host, Brennan LaFaro. Say hi, Brennan. My apologies.
Hello, everybody.
And today we're joined by author Greg Sisco. Hello, sir.
Hello.
Now let's just jump right into it. What got you into horror?
Oh man, I have no idea. I mean, I've been writing since like second grade. Ever since I was a little kid, I always had a project going, and often those projects were horror. So to some extent, I just seem to have been sort of born into it.
So when you were writing those stories in second grade, were you the kid that, everybody thought it was cool that you were writing about, like, let's just go ahead and assume you were writing about, like, dismembered bodies or, I don't know, creepy dolls or something like that? Or did they stay away from you?
Well, I suppose I was not a very popular kid in school, and looking back, that could have had that could have had an effect on it.
That could have done it, certainly.
Yeah.
Now, I want to jump into your background in movies. What got you started into that?
Really around the same time that I got started writing books, or writing stories as a little kid. I had friends who would make like home movies with our parents' camcorders or whatever. So from early childhood, I was doing both of them, and for a long time it was like writing prose, short stories and stuff was one aspect of what was interesting to me, and then the other aspect was acting. And it took a long time to sort of put the two of them together in terms of like, well, what about writing movies and directing movies? What about being the creative force behind the off camera, so to speak. So yeah, I mean, it was really it was like late teens that I really started going into like writing for the screen and some directing work on a couple of things, and just sort of starting to put writing together with movies in a way of putting the two old hobbies together as one.
Okay. And I see here that Gunslinger PI, man, you did like everything for that. Do you want to talk about that at all?
I mean, that movie is basically what I did instead of going to film school. And it's very amateurish. It was done, I was I think 17 when I wrote it, 18 when we shot it, and 19 when I did all of the editing and post-production. And it was it was just something that was done like on nights and weekends when I was working at my first real job after having dropped out of college and trying to basically learn how to make movies by making a movie, which is pretty much what happened. The movie itself, it's a movie that was made by a kid who didn't really know how to make movies. But some of the stuff that we shot earlier on didn't come out very well, and some of the stuff we were shooting by the end did come out pretty well. So it was definitely a learning project, and I later revisited it as a novel, or kind of a novella, sort of somewhere between the line of novella and novel, 10 years or so later, to try and kind of fix some of the stuff that I didn't really think quite turned out like I'd hoped back when I was 18 years old and trying to make a movie.
I hear you. When I shot my only feature, which was, well, it's not even a feature, 20 minutes. I mean, I was going for a stoner comedy, and I had a lot of help with seasoned filmmakers. So I don't know what it would have turned out like if I did it by myself. Now,
Yeah.
what was that first job, the first real job you had?
I was working in a movie theater. I started off selling popcorn in the concession stand. I think by the time we shot the movie, I was working as a projectionist. So, you know, projectionist is a job where you're not doing a lot of hands-on work. You know, you're mostly just keeping an eye on things, making sure that stuff that there are no problems, and you know, every little while starting another projector up. So yeah, I had a lot of downtime up there in the booth where you know, I'd be trying to make plans for the shoots and call and text people and try and put together shooting days on our nights and our weekends. And that was yeah, that was pretty much, what would that have been, like 2006? That was probably the whole of my 2006.
That's pretty interesting. So while you're in charge of running movie times, you're in between doing your own movie.
Right.
That's
And
pretty cool.
when it was finished, we were able to play it at the theater. It was like this 21 screen multiplex, and spent months trying to negotiate further and further up the chain of command to somebody who would actually be able to approve it. But eventually we were able to get them to say that as long as it was a non-profit thing, like we didn't charge anybody for admission or something, they would open one theater up for us for a few hours one night. So we were able to do our premiere in the theater where I worked and where half the cast worked. So that was a pretty fun sort of finish to that project.
Neat. Brendan, you got anything on this subject?
You know, I was just gonna put in the whole. There's so much value in learning by immersion, and I think it's definitely true in the arts. You know, playing in a band versus studying the theory in music, learning by doing. You know, as opposed to, again, studying the theory in a classroom for movie making. But I mean, even I always think of, you know, I went to school to be a teacher for 4 years and studied again, for lack of better words, the theory of it. And I don't think I learned a quarter as much as I did in, you know, 3 months of student teaching. That degree is, you don't want to call it useless, but it's that real life experience that, you know, makes for the best art. And you just can't beat that learning by doing. So actually, as in regards to you working as a projectionist, does that tie in at all to how you wrote Summers with Annie for the Worst Laid Plans anthology?
I don't know. I mean, there might be. I'm trying to remember if there's anything like technical about projection that's in that story. I know that the old man who works in the theater runs the projectors. I guess there's talk of like reel changes, which aren't even really a thing that people do anymore. These days everything's digital, but when I was working in theaters, the films, you'd splice together all of the reels, and they'd just sit in this one big donut of film and play through the whole thing. So it was all done pretty automatically. Back in the old days, they had to run two projectors side by side, and right as one reel ended, they'd have to manually flip things over to the other projector to start the other reel. And so I know quite a bit about that stuff, but I don't know I just always kind of wanted to write a piece of prose that was about like the love of cinema. And that's kind of what Summers with Annie was just an idea uh, of how to do that, and actually started off as a much bigger idea when when I was thinking about how to tell the story. I was trying to take like a protagonist who, the idea was to go from his birth on the day that movies got sound, which in some ways is the birth of modern cinema, all the way up to present day, and tell his life story at the same time as telling like the whole history of cinema. But by the time I got up to him being like 16, 17 years old, it was just like, this is clearly not something I can cram into a short story. There's just, I forget what that anthology that I wrote it specifically for Worst Laid Plans. And it was, 5,000, 6,000 words, something like that was the upper limit. And I just started going like, what I'm starting to write here is like 20,000 at least. It might be novel length to try and tell this entire life story and the entire history of cinema. So it sort of morphed into something else, and has been really, like, I've heard a lot of people tell me how much they loved that story, and it was nice to hear, because when I finished it, it was like, wow, that was, I don't know what this is. This isn't what I set out to write, but we'll see what happens with it.
That's, forgive my clumsily worded question. When I said, did that job have any effect on that story, I didn't necessarily mean the technical aspect, but even just, you said you wrote it almost as, or at least started writing it as, a love letter to cinema. And I mean, I feel like it also acts as, a love letter to kind of that small movie house, or smaller scale movie house, especially on like in the type of location where that cinema is located, where it's kind of like an island getaway. And I would echo what you've heard. That was one of my favorite stories in there, and it has those horror elements, but it also has this sense of beauty to it as well. It's a really terrific story.
Right. I really wanted it to be, in some ways like a romance. Not really like, I mean, I guess it has the kind of boy-girl love story romance aspect to it that's part of it, but more like a romance of just like, romantic love for cinema itself, and for the idea of getting lost in a story, and having a world wash over you and stuff. And it was, I wanted that sort of optimistic quality tied in with the horror quality of it.
Can you tell, for those that haven't read it yet, what the basic plot is?
It's about a little boy who had a life that's always, the key events in his life have always matched up with the key events in the history of film. And when he's about 6 years old, I think, he goes on this trip with his father, who is also a lover of movies, to this island that has a movie that was filmed on the island. And the two of them go in to watch it, and the kid falls asleep before the end of the movie, and his father disappears, and they never find him. He just vanishes out of the movie house. And then it follows his life growing up as working in movie theaters and using films as escapism for a difficult upbringing that he's had as an orphan, up to his marriage, when he returns to the island with his new wife, with a plan to go visit the movie house where his father disappeared when he was a kid, and sort of his ultimate discovery that the movies have one more surprise in store for him in his life.
It was really, yeah, it was really neat. It was like the third story, I think, in the anthology. By the way, how cool is that? For those video watchers, I'm holding, or actually audio listeners, I'm holding up the Worst Laid Plans anthology paperback. How cool is that the adaptation got its funds and
Yeah,
some?
right, and it's still going.
Yeah, 20 something days left by the time this comes out, probably like 15 days or so.
I think
So
that's until the end of March. I think is when the
April
campaign.
2nd is when it ends. April 2nd, April 3rd.
Okay. Yeah, and it's already past what it was seeking, and hopefully with plenty more, because as you know, if you've worked on an independent film, there's never enough money. No such thing as the right amount.
Are you hoping that a novel that you write in the future is turned into, and I'll let me clarify why specifically I'm asking this. Do you hope that it becomes a film, or do you not care? And I ask specifically because recently we had another fellow Canadian horror author, Tim McGregor, who, for those that don't know, had a book released with the same publisher, Off Limits Press, about last month. I think it was last month, Brennan.
I
Yeah.
think you're right. February 15th comes to mind.
I don't know, man. Time just doesn't matter anymore. but he said that he worked in the way he worded it. He said that his films basically just don't watch them. They were what did he say? They're like they're straight to DVD, and he at this point doesn't really care for that world anymore, the adaptation world or the film world. So, okay, this is a long way of me asking you if you are in that same camp, or if you have interest in pursuing other projects in film.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am interested in pursuing other projects in film, and I've got scripts that are out there circulating. I have I have literary management for films who help me get scripts out there, and there's various stuff that's in different stages that may or may not happen. Often in writing a book, I start by writing a screenplay.
Mm-hmm.
I find that a screenplay is very literal and bare bones, and forces you into active storytelling. You can't really. It's much harder to slip into like passive voice stuff in a screenplay format than it is in prose. So you end up telling a story in a very show don't tell manner, by habit, I think, in a screenplay format more so than in prose, and it tends to work well for me as sort of a roadmap of what the story's going to look like from start to finish, what the beats are, and then in going from screenplay to prose, it's like turning on the director brain that's trying to paint the visuals more clearly and trying to jump into the inner motivations and monologues and stuff of people's thought processes that probably don't have much of a place on the page in a screenplay, but give it all its flavor in prose. So yeah, in the cases of some of the novels that I've written, and many of the short stories as well, I started with a screenplay and then turned it into prose from there. So a lot of the time I end up with a screenplay that's ready to go by the time the novel's done anyway.
Oh, wow. Wow, Brennan, any follow-ups with that, or do you want to jump into the In Nightmares We're Alone?
I'm just thinking like how prepared you are. If somebody wants to option the rights to a novel, you can sell them a screenplay the next day. That's brilliant thinking, man.
Yeah, and in some of the cases, I do not have a screenplay for In Nightmares We're Alone, although I'm toying with it. It's possible. It's a
Now,
tough. It's a tough adaptation. It's a weird story.
hey, it's already in acts. You're good. Um, Now, was Worst Laid Plans kind of taking us into In Nightmares We're Alone? Was Worst Laid Plans submitting to that your first interaction with Samantha Koyasnik?
No, I know her from film festivals.
Hmm.
I believe I met her in 2017 at the Genre Blast Film Festival, and she would have had a short film there. I had a screenplay called College Beach Party Massacre 4 that they run an unproduced screenplay competition as well as a film festival, and I won the screenplay competition, and she asked if she could read it, and we've kind of been talking ever since then, passing projects back and forth, and writing our own stuff. I think Worst Laid Plans was the first time we really got to like work on something on the same project together.
Did you write the first 3 Massacre films?
No. Although I knew stuff about them. We had a joke of at the time when I originally wrote that script, we were trying to raise some funding and do it on this little shoestring budget. And we had a joke where we were going to try and put up blog posts and stuff with all this information about the first 3 films. And, like dig up old reviews that we discovered for the first 3 films. And we were going to put fake trailers together for them. For College Beach Party Massacre 1, 2, and College Beach Party Massacre 3D in space.
What the hell? It's bad when it goes into space that quickly.
Yeah.
Right. So
the joke was supposed to be that the whole thing went off the rails in part 3, and now they were scrambling to try and save it from that by bringing back the director from 2 that was like a cult favorite. We had this whole behind the scenes backstory of what we talked about doing like a fake like mockumentary behind the scenes thing for the DVD. There were a lot of plans that never actually happened on on College Beach Party Massacre.
I don't even know what to ask. I feel like I have questions, but I can't even think of them. Brian, save me.
The second film that I made, which is more watchable than the first one at least, a thing called Jesse Thunderwake, American Icon. We ended up with a whole storyline in there where the character was it's all mockumentary style, and it's about a guy who wants to be like the next great writer, director, actor, singer, songwriter, stuntman, model, etc., etc., etc. And we had a section of the movie where he ends up working on College Beach Party Massacre 4. So we were able to sort of bring our own joke full circle into a different movie and recycle it for that.
That's like Inception, man. It's a movie and a movie and a movie.
Yeah.
That is exceptionally meta. All right, so in Nightmares We're Alone. Now, this was originally published in 2015. Greg, if you don't mind, why don't you take us through, basically the journey of putting this book together all the way up to 2021?
Man, it has been a long journey. I have a there's like a post from my Facebook page back in 2013 where I for a long time I had 2 like actual nightmares that I'd had that I had just sort of set aside as like that might make a good short story or something. One that involved a doll and dolls that my mom used to collect when I was a kid, and one that involved plants growing out of my fingernails. And I had this third nightmare about like people being afraid to leave rooms in my house, and sort of woke up from it thinking like that could be like a third. I could maybe package those three if they were like novella length stories, put them all in one cover, and they could maybe work well together. And at the time that I had that idea, like July 2013 or something, I had posted like, wonder if I could have this done by Halloween. Spoiler, I didn't. It was just one of those cases of like the worst attempt or the worst overly optimistic idea of how long it would take to do something. And but at the time, the idea was for them to be three separate stories, just packaged in one cover. And I think I was about halfway through the first one, and just went for a walk, and stuff started coming together in my head about like, well, what if they were, what if the girl from the first one, what if the boy who she meets, what if the guy in the second story is that boy's father, and how would that tie together with this other aspect of this? And the whole thing started to just like blend into a more complicated idea of this of these three stories that were kind of one story. They're separate, but they're also the same in some ways, and happening in the same world at the same time. And man, it turned into just this nightmare of trying to reconcile one thing with another, and try, and not to mention the first draft that I ended up with, I was really unsatisfied with the ending of the third story, but trying to make changes to one of the stories when everything's happening at the same time in all three, and people keep bumping into each other and affecting the other's trajectory. It's this Rubik's Cube thing where you can't fix one side without screwing up the other side. And it turned into like a solid 2 years of working on it constantly. And, like normally I have a lot of fun with writing, but by the time I was like a year into it, I was just so frustrated with this thing of like, I would like to scrap this project, but it's like it's caught on to this point in my head to where it's like I feel like I have this this thing that's the best thing I've ever written that I'm chasing, that I just can't quite shape the way it's supposed to be. And by the time that I didn't even really finish it exactly when I originally published it, self-published it. I hit a point where it was like I wanted to be rid of it so that I could work on other stuff. And every time I tried to just like, well, I'll set this aside and I'll write something else and come back to it, I just feel guilty working on something else that like, well, what about this thing that's like, it's almost there. So I just hit this point where I said, I picked a date and announced it and said it's coming out October 16th, 2017 or whatever, whenever it was that it originally came out. I just started telling everybody it comes out that day, and just told myself like, whatever is written on that day gets published. So, feel free to obsess over it until that moment. But at that moment, you just wash your hands of the thing and move on, which it was pretty good at that point. It's almost the version that you have now. It's quite similar to the version that was published a few years ago. There were little things that I could never quite sort out back then. But the problem with that was the idea of trying to self-publish something that you're eager to wash your hands of is just not a good situation to be in, because when you're trying to create your own publicity and it's for something that you just want to put in the rearview mirror, it's very hard to do a good job with it. So the self-published version never really caught on. There wasn't much publicity for it. I kind of just almost like dropped it online and just went, there you go. I'm moving on. And I didn't even write for a long time after that. I was so tired of the thing at that point. And yeah, it sat there for a long time until Samantha Koyesnik read it a couple years ago and was asking me like, why don't more people know about this? And I was like, oh, because I like severely dropped the ball when I released it. So yeah, we started talking about having me go back to it and properly finish it and turn it into the book that it was supposed to be, and put it out through Off Limits. And man, it was an interesting experience to go back to something I had walked away from for 2 years or 3 or 4 years. I can't keep track of the years anymore.
Time doesn't matter anymore.
Right. But yeah, for years I hadn't even looked at it, and in going back in and like cracking it open, it was like it's like you don't necessarily feel like you're making leaps when it's like a craft that you've been doing your whole life. It's just like, oh, I kind of know how it works. You get a little better at doing something or whatever. But when that much time had gone by, it was interesting to just go back through something and constantly be like, well, okay, but that paragraph we don't need, and this one, we can blend these two together into something a lot tighter here, and then this sentence is kind of just saying the same thing 3 times in 3 different ways. And it was pretty, most of the cleanup was pretty effortless. Not to mention there were old scenes that I had loved that I wrote years ago but cut before I self-published it because they didn't seem to be fitting properly. And looking at them years later, it was like, well, I know why it's not. I know that the reason I loved it was because it was adding this, and the reason it wasn't fitting was because of all this other stuff that was in there that didn't need to be there. But we can just subtract that stuff and insert this stuff in a different way. So yeah, like the whole ending of the second story works much better in the new version. That whole epilogue is new to the new version. It all fits together a lot more tightly than it used to before, and it's just been an interesting experience to go through an extremely frustrating project and then walk away from it for a few years and come back to it and be able to approach it in a happy, productive way, and I think turn it into pretty much the thing that I was chasing years ago that I wasn't good enough at the time to pull off.
That's really cool. I mean, just the idea of writing. I'm going to put words in your mouth. You tiptoed around it, but writing kind of a magnum opus. Like this is, you kind of hinted at this is the best thing you'd written. And by 2017 or whenever you just wanted it off your plate, it wasn't done yet. You weren't, at the point where you could tie it all together. So to be able to kind of come back to it in 2020, tighten it up and put it out this March, like that's excellent, man. Good for you.
Right. And yeah, it's not very often that you get the chance to do something like that, of like a project where you feel like you sort of botched it a little bit and it was almost something, but you didn't quite get to make it into what it was supposed to be. Most of the time, you just kind of have to live with that and take the lessons from it with you and move on to the next thing. But it was pretty cool to get an opportunity with Off Limits where I could come back to it and turn it into, I think, what it was supposed to be, and get a second chance at putting it out there and seeing how people respond to it.
Yeah, part 1 was so creepy, man. Like,
yeah.
That's one of the creepiest things I've ever read. I think it's safe to say.
Really.
There's so many stories about dolls, but like, I don't know, you did something different. And at some points, because due to my lifestyle, I gotta really listen to a lot of the digital books and, text to speech. I found myself laughing out loud while I was in the middle of doing something else. And it was that scene where, this doesn't spoil anything. It's that scene where Martin trusts this big old wang on a stick figure, and then this other boy talks about some I don't know, childish joke about, I think he said peeing on division, and I'm like, that's funny. But it's so creepy, and you break it up with that really silly moment, and then it gets, you get punched in the face with something just as creepy as the previous moment. So I thought it was fantastic. It was a great mix of those two things.
I started off writing mostly comedy for years. I mean, throughout high school and into kind of up to about my mid-20s. Most of what I wrote was, the primary focus was to tell effective jokes with it. And I did some stand-up comedy, though I was never very good at it. Comedy was like a big part of a lot of stuff before I sort of increasingly find myself drawn to horror and thriller stuff. But that note of humor is almost always there. Like I don't think Summers with Annie really had much levity to it, but in most of what I write, I think it still retains. I tend to find that like humor is such a huge part of how people communicate with each other that even when the focus of the story is something dark or grim or whatever, people have a tendency to seek out the humor in the situations and to use it, whether it's as defense or whether it's to just try and lighten someone else's burden or whatever. So yeah, it tends to be that regardless of how dark something goes, I like for there to be a current of some sort of humor that runs throughout it.
I'm pretty sure it was Tom Savini. I was watching one of my favorite movies. My first intro to George Romero was the Nightmare of the, not Nightmare, Night of the Living Dead, the 1990 remake. And right. I love the behind the scenes stuff. I was taught young by my uncle who did independent film that those are free lessons and they're worth listening to. And I'm glad I took that. I heeded his advice because they say a lot of things that can apply to any type of writing. But Tom Savini was talking about how he'll show you something on this side of the screen, and then, like a magician, the scary part's on that side of the screen, and it'll come and hit you in the face. And I'm kind of repeating myself, but that's what you did in part one specifically. Brendan, what do you have to say about this?
Well, first off, back to your thing about injecting humor. I think that's so human, even in the worst situations, trying to lighten the mood and add that bit of levity. I feel like it, when authors do that, even in the midst of a bleak tale, it just injects authenticity. That's kind of how I read it, when the scene that Patrick brings up where where Martin draws a guy with his Johnson hanging out on the chalkboard, like that's every second grader, especially second grader who's maybe stayed back once or twice. It reminds me of the Max Booth's novella that he put out last year, We Need to Do Something. It's a great novella. It's grim. It's bleak as fuck if you haven't read it, but it's got great humor in it. And the little boy in there is always talking about butts and farts and like constantly. And I remember seeing some reviews being like, oh, that's obnoxious and nobody talks like that. It's like, no, you've never been around an 8-year-old, because that's exactly what they're saying. And that's, again, it kind of added for me that air of authenticity. I also loved, going back, your comment about comparing it to like a Rubik's cube. Like, that's,
Yeah.
especially lining everything up with the dates, that had to be a nightmare. Changing one thing and not only just skewing the way it affects the other two acts, but making sure, like, shit, did that happen on September 30th?
Yeah, do you have multiple timelines on a cork board or something, man? Like, how'd you get that set up?
And it's worse than you would think, because when I started writing it, I was experimenting with something in the first draft where I was trying to just write 2,000 words every day, but exactly 2,000. Like, even in the middle of a sentence, I'd just stop when I got to 2,000 and go back the next day, and it worked well. I mean, you tend not to lose your train of thought as much, because you have to stop yourself when you're in the middle of some sort of train of thought sometimes, but so I was writing it that way, and I was writing it without revising it, but I was writing it without an outline. And I had, like I said, all three were based on dreams that I'd had. So I kind of had vague ideas of the direction that they would go. Although really only the dream for the first story had a real, like, through line of a story to it. The others were just kind of visuals. But so I wrote those 3 stories over the course of 5 weeks or so, with no outline. And for the first half of while I was writing it, I didn't even realize that they were going to be connected. So I just ended up with 3 very disconnected stories, and then had to find ways to marry them after the fact, after they already existed, which was terrible, because they it's like you search out ways to link them, but then you find things you want to change about one of them, and you have to unlink these things that you previously linked. And it would have been much easier to do if I had written the 3 stories side by side in some sort of giant bullet list outline from the beginning. But I didn't realize what I was writing when I started writing it, and trying to reconcile it after the fact was, it was a big part of why it became just this out of control project that I couldn't find a way to get a handle on for so long.
Let's go back to when Sam first read your manuscript, and you said it was, like, let's just say 2017. So it's at least a few years before she has her press. Did she see a version that was similar to the one that we saw? And at what point did she approach you, when or before she announced Off Limits Press was a thing?
Well, Off Limits Press was a thing before she approached me. She read it before she had a press, and at the time that she read it, she was just telling me, like, you should re-release this, or you should, either find a publisher, or, like, do a new edition or something. Like, you should do something, because more people should read this. And it was kind of sticking in my head for I don't know, it was probably 6 months or a year between when I had that conversation with her, and then to the point where she started her own press. And then once the I don't know, she'd probably been running the press for at least they were up to, at least 1 book had been released, maybe 2 books had been released by the time that the conversation started turning into, well, what if it was published through Off Limits, which kind of took it from from this idea of like, yeah, maybe I should do that, maybe I should consider it, to like, I'd really like to do something with Off Limits. That would be pretty fun. Let's let's go back to this project, which had always kind of been an intimidating project, because it was just like I had such a bad relationship with this story by the time that I walked away from it the first time. There was just part of me that was like, I promised myself I didn't have to go back to that again. But no, I had a good time with it when I went back to it.
Brian,
and I think the version of it that she read is fairly close. The two editions of it, I probably got it 90% of the way there last time and just couldn't figure out that last 10%. And this new edition has just been about going back and fixing that 10% that I could never quite get there previously.
So I really like that you shared that they were all based on nightmares, whether they were fully fleshed out or just kind of like a mental image or two. Because when I was looking at the acts, I kind of took away from them that they all kind of lean into a subgenre. And, maybe this is just me putting my bent on it. But, the first one, it's you could say it's doll horror. I've got another one in mind, but I don't want to say it, for fear of spoilers. The second one is just, here's how body horror is done, people. And then the third one has this kind of like quiet literary quality to it. Now, was that something that you noticed, the difference in kind of subgenres and styles and leaned into, or just it was what it was?
I started thinking early on about TV shows that are like anthology horror shows, and I started picturing the first one as like an episode of some of the various Stephen King anthology shows that have been done. Like I think they did a Nightmares and Dreamscapes TV show, and I forget what else. There have been a handful of them, but I kind of pictured it as like this would be kind of at home as an episode of something like one of those, or maybe even like a Tales from the Dark Side. And the second one to me was like Masters of Horror on Showtime. It was like this is the graphic, throw everything you got against the wall. And the third one was Twilight Zone, and the third one even mentions Twilight Zone, and it's kind of, I was trying to do something kind of in that old Rod Serling style of very quiet, character driven, and the horror is kind of off screen, not really seen. I mean, the story is that thing you don't quite see. Yeah, I mean, I think to some extent I thought of the third one, at least early on, as being a haunted house story. I thought of the second one as being body horror, and the first as doll horror. And I kind of matched the tones to these various TV shows. And yeah, I don't know. I think that's kind of what it was born out of.
No, that's perfect. That makes all the sense. Now I'm thinking like part one almost has kind of a creep show vibe to it too. That's one that could fit in there pretty nicely. Pat, throw it to you, man.
I can't think of the title, but Richard Matheson had a I Am Legend collection with I Am Legend and a bunch of short stories. And they have this one neat witch one where it's got this one scene where you could see, I might be mixing up the exact scenario, but the witch could see you through your eyes, and I kept thinking of that story when I was reading part one. But moving on to part two, my God, I cringed a lot because hangnails are a bitch, man, and that's got nothing on this. Now, did you only dream of that one time, or was that a recurring nightmare?
It was just one time. I had I didn't even I didn't even have a lot of memory of what the dream was. I just remember that I had this nightmare that I was that I had plants growing out of under my fingernails, and I was like ripping them out, trying to like blend in as a normal person in society. Well, where they were growing more and more, and I just, that imagery, like I woke up from that and just thought like, plants growing out of your fingernails is pretty gruesome. I'm not sure. There must be a story behind that I could chase down somehow. And yeah, I mean, and in some ways it became a story about a guy who struggles to blend into the world and struggles to have a life as a normal human being. And I mean, the other way that I had separated the stories was sort of like a birth, life, and death kind of thing. You've got this young coming of age story for a person who's just sort of reaching a point where you get to have a life of your own in the world, and then you have someone who is having a key shift in the middle of his life, and then you have someone who's kind of approaching the tail end of her life, as the three stories that share all of these different aspects together. So that second story being growth, as it's growth in terms of the things coming out of his fingernails, but it's also it's the story of the guy who's kind of having to finally face the moment where he's got to pass from being sort of a man-child into being a real member of society.
I like how with the first part one, the protagonist Macy, you see her mother in one light, then part two you see her in a second light, and that just speaks on kind of life. You know one person as one way, and someone else will surely know them in a completely different way, in a appealing way.
Right. Yeah, that was kind of on the key night where I went for that walk and started seeing the three stories as one story. That was kind of one of the big revelations that I was finding. There's a moment in the third story, a key moment where the character sees a banner that says "Be kind, everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle." And that was kind of a scene that came to me when I was on that walk, and I just started thinking of like this idea of trying to show people in different lights and trying to like make a reader hate people and then like later look at them and understand them a little more and see like, yeah, I was kind of being unfair when I judged that person. And like Macy's mother is a good example of when you read the first story, you're just like, God, this woman is terrible. I hate this woman. And then I think if I pulled it off well, when you're reading her in the second story, it's like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess we all have bad days. Maybe she's got some qualities that aren't so bad about her, and and kind of the same thing with Macy's teacher. Is she just you read the first story and she seems terrible. It's like, God, I'd hate to have this woman as a teacher. And the third story, it's like, she has a pretty hard life in general, though.
Is that a mantra that you have in a day-to-day situation where basically reserve judgment because you don't know what journey they're going through or what path they're walking?
I mean, it's something that I should have as a mantra. You try to keep that in mind. You try to have empathy for people who you have bad interactions with, but it's at the same time, everybody everybody has that everybody's got the flaws and the virtues, like and each of us is no different. You fall into bad patterns with people, and you dislike people maybe for reasons that aren't entirely fair or that you're not properly seeing the two sides of, and that Yeah, I was trying to do a lot of that with this story, where see things in one light and then look again, and maybe something was a little different than you realized.
There, Bernie, got anything for that?
Yeah, I mean, I just going off that point. What really struck me was phone conversations where we would, replay a conversation verbatim, but just getting to see the characters' actions on one side in one story, and hearing the same dialogue, but seeing the characters' actions on the other end of the line in a different story. Just what an excellent way to go about it. You're not necessarily feeding us any new plot information, I guess. We're still getting the same dialogue, but just we get this really subtle look that just, changes it without beating us over the head with it.
Right. Those scenes really they were nerve-wracking to write, because it was like, man, if this
I'll
doesn't
bet,
work,
man.
this doesn't work. Somebody's stuck reading like 5 pages of something they already read and going like, why the hell are you telling me this again? That, like, and phone conversations, which I think in most cases on there are pretty short. However, there are a couple of longer. There's a scene between the narrator of the second story when he gets a visit from the narrator of the third story. Like, she actually comes to his office, and the scene is a fairly long scene that I've got like the entire scene twice from 2 different angles, and it was just like, man, I hope that these like 2 separate revelations out of the same events work, because if they don't, it's just going to be frustrating to read. There are classroom scenes as well that play twice, where you see him first from the perspective of Macy and then later from the perspective of Edna Harris.
You know what, though? I think it's so, no, I can't really speak to this 100% because, I really enjoyed Summers with Annie before picking this up. So I already, you know, knew / suspected / really hoped I was going to like it. But to Patrick's point earlier, he said that the first section, Act 1, just blew him out of the water, and me too. So my thinking is, if somebody's picking this book up and this is their first exposure to you, I feel like you earn their trust in that first act. So, if I'm a reader who's new to this author and I read this, holy shit, like, look what this guy just did in the first 30% of this book. If I'm sitting through stuff I've already sat through, you've got my attention. I'm gonna you've earned it with those first X number of pages, and I'm gonna let you drag me rehash events because there's got to be a reason for it.
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that doll story. For all of the enormous amounts of rewriting that were done throughout the years working on this, the doll story did not really transform a whole lot from its original first draft. And most of the changes that were made to the doll story were just made to link it better to the other 2. That the story itself didn't really change. And in fact, the story itself is, like I said, they were all 3 were based on dreams. That was the initial thing that linked the 3 together. And that was really the only one of the 3 where there was like a whole story to it. And in real life, my mom did have a bunch of dolls in a doll room. I had a much better relationship with my mom than the character in the story does.
That's good.
But
Greg's in a fake room.
But yeah, she had that house that they live in, and I just really wrote it like based on the house that we lived in at the time, and there was a doll room in there with shelves that had a bunch of these porcelain like stuffed cotton doll bodies with like porcelain heads on them.
That's so creepy.
Yeah, they had a bit of a creepy vibe to them, but yeah, I had a dream about that house and a doll that had I don't think that they were separate colored eyes in the dream. I think they were just it was regular, eyes. But the idea that I was seeing the eyes in different places besides the doll happened throughout there. I think I cut something out of the dream that was like bees with the eyes or something, because it was like, yeah, that's not gonna work. That might work in a dream, but you try and put that in a book, that's just stupid. But it's fun. It's probably only once or twice in my life that a story has come to me that fully formed, just like out of the subconscious. But it's nice when it happens.
We all strive for.
Yeah. I would love to be able to just write all of my stories in my sleep.
What's it been like working with Sam so far?
Oh, it's been great. We we worked on Summers with Annie, and then this is the long form project we did shortly after that. But yeah, we had a good time working on Summers with Annie, and she did a great job at putting that book together. So I had plenty of confidence that she'd do well by this one. And yeah, just throughout, it's been a great process of back and forth, and I think has managed to be a better book than it would be if she hadn't come on board, and not to mention just a book that would have just sat there gathering dust for the probably for good if she hadn't come along and been the one to grab it up and insist that we do something new with it.
Well, I'm glad that you did. So your book is number 4 in her release order for Off Limits Press, and so far it's 4 out of 4 great books, man. So she's got a good eye.
Yeah, that it's quite a press. That Off Limits at this point has been around, I think, less than a year.
Yep.
And yeah, already is just doing great. And they got, I forget how many books are on that schedule that are coming out later this year, but there are quite a few more.
Yeah, she's got an anthology. Let's see, Catherine McCarthy's next. I forget who's after her.
Eric LaRocca is September 1st. He has his collection coming out. There is another person who I'm forgetting, and I feel terrible about that.
Something Clear in October.
Yes, yeah. And actually, she just announced a little while ago, Waylon Jordan. Pat, I think you read one of his books. He has a book coming out through the press in 2022.
Yeah, so what I read for Waylon was I'm probably going to butcher the order of these words, but forgive me. It's an LGBTQ epic fantasy, and it's the first in a trilogy. I got an audiobook version. It's great. I loved it. He's got the second one coming out soon, I think. So, yeah, he's a great writer. Another person that was in Or Slate Plans.
Right. And he's there. The movie's got his story's getting adapted for the movie, I believe.
Yeah, him, Haley Piper, Patrick Lacey. I forget the others. Anything else on this book there, Brennan?
No, if you got somewhere you want to go, take us.
Yeah, so are you Canadian or did you move to Canada? I couldn't get that straight myself.
I'm a dual citizen.
Oh, okay.
My parents are Canadians, but I was born in the States.
Oh, okay. Whereabouts in the States do you live?
At this point, I am actually just moved into an apartment today in Boise, Idaho, which is mostly where I grew up. I was born in Los Angeles, and I've lived really all over the place. Los Angeles to Boise to Austin, Texas to Kissimmee, Florida to Cozumel, Mexico to Guangzhou, China, back to Austin, Texas, to Mattoon, Illinois, on to Los Angeles again, up to Vancouver, British Columbia, just recently, and then now back into Boise, Idaho.
Any reason why? That's a hell of a lot of places over the globe, man.
Yeah, I'm no particular reason. They've all just sort of happened by chance that somebody says, "Hey, there's a thing going on over here," and I go, "Yeah, I'm not doing anything."
I've been to Kissimmee. Folks used to have a timeshare there. It's pretty great as a kid because next door is Disney World.
Yeah, you
and
can see the Disney World fireworks. I remember you could see them from the balcony on the apartment where I was, and it was just a pretty cool thing to have fireworks every night.
Yeah, what do you got a particular favorite spot where you've lived so far?
I really loved. I only lived there for about 4 months, but I had a great time in Cozumel, Mexico. Living on the island there. It was Cozumel is mostly like they make most of their money from the tourists, and it's like cruise ships come in and they land on one side of the island there, and there's this strip of businesses that is mostly owned by the cruise ship companies, and it's like a little Las Vegas area over there in Cozumel. But then it's like you go 2 or 3 streets back and you're into like a proper Mexican city where you don't where the culture just feels a little different. You feel like you're in Mexico rather than feeling like you're in some tourist area that has been built by American cruise ship companies. But it was a nice mixture. It was my first time living outside of the U.S. It wasn't my first time visiting, but it was my first time living outside, and it just it made for a nice like transition of like. If you get homesick for your own culture, just walk 3 blocks that way, and you'll get your fill of it pretty quick because it's just an annoying party city over there. And then walk back the 3 blocks, and you'll be nice and happy that you're in a different place, getting a new experience.
Very odd. Now, I like
what? No, I gotta know what brought you to China, because. The other ones, that accounts for some bouncing around, but at one point you end up in China.
Yeah, I lived there for about 1.5 years. I was teaching English as a second language. My brother lived in China already at that point. I think he spent about 12 years there. Just recently moved to Canada, but he had moved there and was teaching English. I was living in Cozumel trying to scrape by with writing money, either from writing fiction or doing like freelance SEO content and stuff, but was kind of just barely staying above water there. And my brother it was looking like he might have to leave out of some visa problem in China, and he just told me like, well, my bosses trust me. If you want to come over and just take over when I leave, I'll just tell him my brother's taking over, and it'll be fine, and you'll make good money doing it. And I was like, yeah, I guess that sounds interesting. I could go do that.
What was that like adjusting?
I had to get like a visa for it and everything. And by the time I got it all done, my brother had actually sorted out the problems that were looking like they were going to have him leave. And at that point, it was like, well, I just went to all the trouble of getting approved to go to China. And then he said like, well, I'll still introduce you to people. You'll get hired. No problem. Like, okay, let's give this a shot.
Did you work with your brother?
No, at least not. I mean, I briefly taught a few of his classes when I first arrived there, just to kind of get a sense. I had no teaching background, but and I taught a class within like 24 hours of arriving. I went into a class with him. He had like his whole lesson on a thumb drive, and went into the classroom. I sat in the, he sort of introduced me to the class, and then I just kind of sat there and watched him teach it. Then he went into another class and he did it a second time. And after doing it twice, he was like, "Hey, you want to take over after lunch? And I'm going to go do something." I was like, "Oh, okay. I guess we're getting right into this then." So it was, that was an interesting experience. But yeah, and I mean, not long after that, I met with some people from a different school who gave me more of a proper full-time job, and then I worked at one school and my brother worked at a different one, and didn't really do much together beyond the first few classes.
What was it like adjusting to that culture and in that world?
No, I loved it there for the first 8 or 10 months, because it felt like there were just all sorts of adventures, and like people see you and I don't know, just invite you to do things that you would never expect to end up doing, and you end up like having tea in strangers' houses just because they saw you walking down the street and they hadn't met a foreigner before, and it's just like, it's really fun to just kind of like be an experience for people. But there were just 100 little things that irritated me, that it would be like extremely crowded areas and people constantly yelling across buildings to each other. You'd be sitting in a restaurant or something and someone would be yelling from one table to another, and you're like, why don't you go over there and talk to them? It's just a ton of little things like that after 8 or 10 months I'd start to I don't know, I just started to want to find something different to do. The novelty of it, of being in a new place, sort of wore off. I don't know. I had most of the time that I spent there, I had a great time with it. But by the time that I left after a year and a half, I was happy to go somewhere else and try something else different.
That's a hell of a life, man. Brennan, anything else on this subject?
Yeah, I'm wondering, being in three, if you count the United States, bouncing around between 3 countries and a bunch of different cities, do you feel like all that life experience impacted your writing?
Well, I mean, everything impacts a little. I mean, you're using all of yourself and all of your experiences and stuff when you write, hopefully. But I don't know. I mean, many of those places I've played with in short stories. Eventually, I wrote a thing set in Cozumel recently that I'm hoping will make it into an anthology that I sent it off to, and I have a story set in China that I like a lot, but I've had trouble placing it anywhere. And yeah, so I mean, I like I try to bring some of it into the writing and in those forms, and certainly just various similarities and differences between various people that you encounter are always handy in creating characters and interactions between people. But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to spot the concrete ways that something like that plays into being a writer. But I'm sure that all of it bleeds in there in many smaller ways.
There's got to be a story where a family in China sees you walking down the street and invites you in for tea because you're the new person in town, and it just goes south from there.
Yeah.
That's a setup for a horror story.
I was in China at the time that Edward Snowden in the U.S. Fled to Hong Kong, and that whole story was breaking. And I remember from that week that I was walking down a street in China, and this family saw me and started waving me into their house and gave me tea and stuff, and then asked if I was Snowden. I was thinner, and I was clean shaven. I had glasses on. I looked a little like him. So it was just a funny moment of like, what a guy to get mistaken for. Seems almost a little dangerous to be mistaken for him.
Yeah, I wouldn't really want to be him.
Yeah. I don't know if maybe there could have been a story in there somewhere.
How about we jump to what are you reading now?
What am I reading? I'm reading I had a story in this anthology, but I'm just now getting around to reading it. Whole Dark Holidays.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
It was like Gabino Iglesias, like right before Christmas, came up with this idea for a Christmas anthology. And gave people like 3 weeks to submit to it or something of, a Hallmark style feel good story that's suddenly destroyed by monsters. And so I sent a thing off to that and had a story in it, but until now I'd just not gotten around to reading through it, and it's a lot of fun. There's some good stuff in here.
I don't think it was even 3 weeks, but props to him and anybody who got accepted, and frankly anybody who got a story cleaned up and submitted to that.
It was a tight deadline. I don't know how he did it.
Undertaking.
I can't imagine how you read through all of those and make selections, and that's it was tough enough to write a story in a couple of weeks. I don't know how he managed to read through them and find an anthology out of it.
Yeah, just he kind of disproved any publisher in the indie game that says it's too time consuming to send a personalized rejection back, because he's one person and read through like 700 stories.
Yeah, from the way it sounds, he sent like every single person a personal rejection. Yeah.
He did. I mean, the man must not sleep. Everybody, the rest of the world goes to bed. Gabino edits and punches Nazis.
So, Brian, what are you? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Greg, go ahead.
I don't know. I don't know what I was saying.
I am reading. I just started Consider This by Chuck Palahniuk. It's a kind of memoir-y and on writing type book. Basically just a bunch of stuff that he's learned throughout his career, and the dude's been writing great stuff for like 25 years now, so if he's learned something, I'm willing to listen.
You're willing to consider it.
I am willing to consider it, yes.
Smart.
It's pretty good. Are you getting a lot out of it so far?
Well, I've read about approximately 5 pages of it, so I read the table of contents. That looked very promising. No, I mostly read the I read the introduction just this afternoon, and it looks cool. It looks like it's going to be very anecdotal, a lot of stories, kind of behind the scenes stuff. But I've read everything he's put out, and I'm not going to miss this one.
Read a little of. I've read most of what he's put out. I've read a little of his nonfiction. Not a whole. I think he did two books come to mind. One was like Fugitives and Refugees, that was about like areas around where he grew up or something. But
there was like a series, and I don't know of any other authors who participated in it, but they essentially wrote like the I don't know if sordid is the right word, but like, he wrote about Portland in that book, and it's not necessarily it's not going to read like, a field guide to Portland.
Yeah.
He's going to let you know that there are, more strip clubs per square mile in Portland than any other city in the US. Like, that's the type of stuff you're going to get in there. Which is true, by the way.
Good to know.
Yep.
So I'm about 4 or 5 hours into Fear's audio version by Ronald Kelly. Really digging it so far, and I'm about to jump into holding up a copy of Shane Hawk's Anoka. It's his first release, self-published collection, and it has a lot of hype. So I'm really looking towards that. Indigenous horror. Not my first Indigenous horror, but I'm very much so looking towards this. I like the cover. I mean, I find myself, the more I read from people I haven't heard of before, of, werewolf stories, vampires, whatever, the more I'm finding out that there's a million more ways that I just haven't read yet that are amazing. Because for a while I thought, like, you can't do anything else with a werewolf story or pick any other, classic monster, but there are so many other ways to do it. I love it. I read Ronald Kelly's Undertaker's Moon, and that's a werewolf story, and he nailed it. So I don't know. The more books you read, the better. That's what I'm basically getting at. So Greg, is there anything you are currently working on, or anything that you will be working on soon that you can talk about?
Man, I don't know if I can talk about anything. It's like I've got all these projects that I'm working on, but I'm like, I don't know if any of them are at a point where I should be saying much about them so far. I mean, I'm for one thing, I'm waiting on a lot of the like exclusivity windows on various short stories that I've put out to expire, because I want to in the fairly near future compile a lot of those into a collection. I've still never really put out a collection unless you consider In Nightmares We're Alone to be a collection.
That's more like I would consider it like a mosaic novel.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really think of it as a collection, but I've heard, I've seen reviews that called it a collection, and I wouldn't really argue with them either. It kind of is, but yeah, I like horror short story collections a lot, and just have never gotten around to doing one. And at this point, just from writing from various anthologies and magazines and stuff, I've collected quite a few short stories that I'm starting to try and put together into a couple of different categories that I think would sort of complement each other nicely. That I've probably got about one collection worth. Might need one or two new stories that I still need to write, and then probably got half of a second collection together at this point already.
Oh wow!
So, I hope that I'll have I'll be able to put out a collection in the next year or two of I'm gonna try and split it to where it's like about 2/3 of the stories are stuff that's collected from previous publications, and about 1/3 are completely new, so that everybody's getting something. But yeah, I mean, that's probably, of the stuff that I'm working on, that's like the only thing that I'm like, oh, I'm happy to mention that.
Not a problem. Understood.
I have at least one film screenplay that's going fairly well, that may or may not end up as something. I have a pilot that's out there that we'll see if it turns into something. I have a novel that I'm working on that I don't really want to talk about. It's got all sorts of stuff that I don't know. I don't know what the timeline is, and I hope that it eventually happens. But it's always just I don't know. I'm always afraid to say too much about something too soon.
That's probably for the best. I mean, you don't want to say anything if it doesn't happen. So where can people follow you?
Well, I at the moment I'm still on Facebook and Twitter, though I'm looking at soon sort of moving my online self just to a personal blog. So I've got gregsisco.com, which will be around for a good long while, and Facebook and Twitter are both still there, at least for the next few months, I think.
Very good. Is there any final thoughts, any final comments that you have, Greg? Very good.
Yeah, that's what I got.
All right, so nothing. Brennan, anything from you?
No, just thank you for your time, spending an hour and a half with us on a Friday night.
Yeah, I've been glad to be here. Thanks for having me on.
You could be partaking in that Boise nightlife.
Yeah, I've spent all morning moving, and I've still got some more stuff to move. So I think nightlife's a few days off at least.
So Greg, thank you. We appreciate you coming on. Brennan, thank you as always. Listeners, thank you for joining us with another conversation. And next Monday we will have Tim Lebanon. So stay tuned for that. You have many options in podcasts to choose. Thank you for picking us, and we'll see you next time.